Good day, everyone. I'm Meng Yong from Reading Bakery Systems. Today, I'm great to be given this opportunity to share insights into baked pet food to everyone. In case you still have more questions pertaining to baked pet food after this webinar, please feel free to reach out to us and drop by to our online virtual booth for further information. In today's presentation, I will first cover the comparison between baked kibble and high-pressure extruded kibbles. Then we shall look at the global pet food market trend and explore the market opportunities for baked kibble. In the third part, I will highlight the key processing steps and challenges of the commercial production of baked pet food. Finally, we will go through some examples of baked pet food together. At the end of this sharing session, you will see the market potential of baked pet food and understand its critical processing steps to ensure a successful commercial production. Without further ado, let's dive straight to the first part, comparison between baked kibble and high-pressure extruded kibbles. As its name implies, baked kibbles undergo slow oven baking process to achieve a pathogen kill step and the cooking of the ingredients. This differs from the common high-pressure extruded kibble, which undergoes a high temperature and high pressure extrusion process that serve to cook the ingredient in a much shorter time span. Now let's look at the production throughput between the two systems. In a given footprint, the throughput of baked kibble production line is lower than high pressure extrusion process. Thanks to advancement in baking technology, the throughput gap can now be reduced by fully automated design and a wide body oven. In terms of the risk of fat oxidation, baked kibble can have most of the oil and fat mixed into the dough before baking. Hence, there is significantly lesser amount of oil spray required after the baking process. The concealed oil and fat within the baked kibble can better withstand oxidation compared to the spray oil and fat found in the expanded texture of the extruded kibbles. Baked kibble is usually denser and harder compared to extruded kibble. The typical density of baked kibble is about 0.7 gram per milliliter, whereas for extruded kibble, this value is closer to about 0.5 gram per milliliter. If we compare the nutrient retention between the two products, there is no clear winner as scientific data on this front is still quite limited. However, the processing temperature and pressure in the baking process is considerably milder than high-pressure extrusion. It is generally perceived that baked kibble has better nutrient retention, and baked kibble has also a much lower degree of starch gelatinization compared to extruded kibble. This could help to regulate glucose absorption among pet cats. Next, baked kibble possesses unique baked aroma and natural color that is not present in extruded kibbles. Baked kibble does not require coloring agent and it will have the natural browning on its surface. In terms of buyers' perception, baked products often perceived as having better quality because of its humanized way of preparation. Hence, they usually command a price premium over their extruded counterpart. Lastly, baked kibbles made by using Rotary molder have a more defined and distinct three-dimensional shape compared to the extruded kibbles. Now, let's turn our attention to the market trends and opportunities of baked pet food. This chart from Statista shows the worldwide growth trend of pet food. The global pet food market has been on a steady rise in the past 10 years, and it is forecasted that it will keep on growing for the next 5 to 10 years. This chart further segregates growth by regions. North America and Western Europe are mature markets with the largest market share, while Asia Pacific and Latin America will show the highest absolute growth in the next 5 years. We can see from this graph, the data to the right of this black line are the forecast data for the next 5 years. So Asia Pacific and Latin America, they have the bigger potential in terms of the forecasted growth rate for the next 5 years. From this chart, we can also see that cat food, as represented by this orange line, and also dog food are among the fastest growing category in this forecast. So Asia alone is forecast to contribute about 44% of absolute global growth for the next 5 years. So what drives the strong growth of worldwide pet food sales? Besides the obvious reason of the growth of pet population, the trend of premiumization across the globe contributes to the growth in pet food sales as well. The y-axis of this graph shows the 5-year forecast of the growth in pet population, while the x-axis shows the 5-year forecast of the increase in spending per pet. This increase in spending per pet is attributed to upgrade from normal pet food to a more premium pet food by pet owners. We can see that the trend of premiumization is most apparent in China, where the spending per pet is almost double in the next 5 years. This is followed by other emerging markets such as Brazil and Indonesia, and countries in Asia Pacific, Latin America, and Middle East region. In contrast, mature markets in North America and Europe are forecasted to show low to moderate growth in spending per pet over the next 5 years. In today's presentation, I will explain how big pet food can benefit from the trend of premiumization. Pet food market is divided into different segments. Today's focus is on the largest pet food segment, which is the dry pet food. And among dry pet food, 70% are dog food, with the remaining 30% being cat food. Now let's take a look at the US dry pet food market. There are 4 major types of dry pet food, namely traditional dry kibble, kibble plus, freeze-dried, and air-dried pet food. Traditional dry kibble takes up the largest market share with up to 61% of the total pet food consumption, followed by kibble plus, which is the mix of traditional kibble and freeze-dried raw. Freeze-dried and air-dried pet food show a relatively low market share due to its exorbitant price. When we look at traditional dry kibble, about 95% of it are made via high-pressure extrusion process, with only 5% are made by baking process. This is because baking process has a lower throughput and oftentimes more labor-intensive. However, with the advancement of baking technology, the capacity gap can now be reduced and fully automated production line can be set up. Now back to the question that I raised earlier. How big kibble can benefit from the trend of premiumization that we see in the global pet food market? Baking process is widely seen as a humanized way of pet food processing, as it resembles the same processing step of bread, pizza, and biscuit that we enjoy as staple foods. Hence, big pet food is generally perceived as being more humanized and premium, and its limited supply in the market gives rise to its premium pricing. I have summarized a chart showing the comparison between the 4 different types of dry pet food. In terms of throughput, the high-pressure extrusion system has the highest throughput, without doubt. While looking at the pricing premium, freeze-dried raw and air-dried pet food commands the highest price premium, while big pet food has significant pricing advantage compared to high-pressure extruded kibble. Freeze-dried, air-dried, and big pet food all have good buyer perception as being more healthy or premium. The freeze-dried raw requires rehydration before feeding, hence it is not as convenient as the other 3 pet food type when we talk about the ease of use. Both big kibble and high-pressure extruded kibble has the best food safety rating as it involves Q-step in its processing, whereas for freeze-dried raw, it doesn't involve Q-step in its preparation and hence it has the lowest rating in this aspect. When we compare in terms of market competition, Freeze-dry, air-dry, and baked pet food are all having less competition due to the limited options available in the market. Finally, we compare the market size of this pet food. Due to the exorbitant price of freeze-dry, raw, and air-dry product, they remain a niche product in the market. Whereas baked kibble and extruded kibble have relatively much larger market, since kibble is still the mainstream product with its easy to use and store features. Now let's move on to the key processing criteria and challenges in the production of baked pet food. We shall start with the formulation. We often hear the questions about the amount of fresh meat that can be incorporated into baked kibble. This is because higher amount of fresh meat is desired in premium pet products, and manufacturers want to tap the premium market. The limitation of the amount of fresh meat is often due to its higher moisture and fat content, and also the seasonal effect on the fresh meat fat or moisture content, and this all makes forming process more challenging. There are various types of forming equipment that can be used to form kibble with low to high fresh meat content of up to 60% or higher. In order to achieve the minimum protein requirement in a kibble, meat meal is often used to make up for the protein content. This chart by Dr. Fahy shows the major ingredients in a kibble formulation and its percentage range. Protein source can be animal-based or plant-based, and its percentage in final product is usually in the range of 25 to 35%. And the moisture is important in the formulation as it allows gelatinization of starch during the baking process. The dough should have about 30% moisture. Fat content can be vegetable oil or animal fat. They are critical to ensure that the pet food contains sufficient calorie content. And carbohydrate-wise, it serves as the binding agent for the kibble upon gelatinization process. It is usually about 30%, with the exception for high fresh meat formulation, when other binding agents can be present to aid the binding process. Other ingredients include dietary fiber or optional binding agent and other minor ingredients such as multivitamins, minerals, and antioxidants could be added upon baking process. After we cover the formulation part, now we shall talk about the mixing of these ingredients. Usually the mixing of kibble dough is very swift, with the mixing of the dry ingredients then followed by the addition of fresh meat, oil, and water if there is any. The mixing process can be done by either a batch mixer, as shown in these two pictures. For a fully automated process, a continuous mixer can also be used to produce a more consistent kibble dough in terms of moisture and also fat level control. The kibble dough can be automatically transferred to the next forming equipment by using conveyors. Now let's take a look at one of the core process of pet food baking line, the forming equipment. Today I will mainly cover three different types of forming equipment, namely the rotary molder, the wire cut machine, which is extrusion and wire cut machine, and also unique low pressure extruder. Each forming equipment will produce different product shapes and has varying degree of the amount of fresh meat that it can handle. Now let's take a look at the first type, which is the rotary molder machine. It has the best efficiency in terms of loading up the oven belt, and hence it will have the highest throughput compared to the other two forming equipment. However, in terms of the percentage of fresh meat inclusion, it has its limitation because when the kibble dough has too high moisture content or fat content in the dough, it will have difficulty in extracting the dough pieces out of the mold. The products formed by rotary molder has distinct three-dimensional shape, as you can see to the right here. You will find some of the kibble and pet treat examples formed by rotary molded equipment. Another way of forming kibble and pet treat is by low pressure extrusion. The dough is extruded at low pressure through a die plate, as shown here. The die plate can be of a different design, and hence various product shapes can be formed by different die spread design. The capacity of low pressure extrusion is usually lower as compared to the rotary molder. However, it can extrude kibble with higher meat percentage. So this is the typical example of a kibble that is extruded out of the low pressure extruder. The low pressure extruder can produce pet treat with fillings too. So we can have various type of fillings. For instance, we can have a peanut butter, cheese, or other type of fillings to be extruded. The third forming equipment is the wire cut extrusion machine. This is usually meant for the production of soft pet treats that resemble the cookies that we enjoy. Premium soft treats for aged pets can be produced by this machine. The next core process of a baked pet food line is the oven baking process. This is where Q step occurs and kibble pieces attain its baked aroma and natural browning during this process. To ensure a consistent kibble quality, the baking process is usually shorter at about 3 to 4 minutes depending on the kibble size and also the dough moisture content entering the oven. And due to the presence of moisture within the kibble internal temperature, or we call the core temperature, is usually lower than the water boiling temperature throughout the baking process. In this case, which is close to about 80 degrees Celsius of the core temperature, while the oven air temperature is about 250 degrees Celsius. As the kibble exits the oven, it has all the baked attributes, but its moisture content is still high at about 15%. It is a good practice to separate baking and drying process so that the remaining moisture within the kibble can be dried out at lower temperature in a dryer at about 100 degrees Celsius so that the skin of the kibble would not be burned due to overbaking at high temperature. So after the dryer, the kibble moisture content can also be controlled more effectively in the range of 8 to 10%. One of the key objectives of baking is the Q step. It is critical for the safety of pets and pet owners. These are the important heat tolerance coefficients for a certain pathogen that can be analyzed by a microbiologist. I am not going to overwhelm you with these definitions. In short, these coefficients characterize how easy or difficult is it to kill off certain pathogen in a specific medium, which in this case the kibble dough. For manufacturers, besides analyzing the final products for the presence of pathogens, a better way would be to measure the thermal processing profile of the kibble. We can do it by measuring the core temperature of the kibble as it travels along the tunnel oven. If the core of the kibble undergoes sufficient thermal processing, that is sufficient temperature and heating time according to the heat tolerance coefficient of the pathogen of concern, let's say Salmonella, then we can safely say that the kibble has achieved the Q step because the core of the kibble is actually the cold spot of the kibble. So if the cold spot or the core of the kibble can achieve the Q step, we can say the whole kibble has achieved the Q step. Another critical objective of baking and drying is the reduction of moisture content so that manufacturers can achieve the target water activity for dry pet food. Low water activity inhibits fungi, mold, and bacterial growth. It is critical in extending the shelf life of kibble products. So from this table, we can see that these are the threshold level of water activity that is required by bacteria to sustain itself. Typically for a baked kibble, the target water activity is about 0.4 to 0.45, which translates to about 8 to 10% of moisture content within the kibble. With a separate drying process, as I mentioned earlier, this objective can be achieved consistently. The last critical processing step is the cooling. Products coming out of the dryer requires gradual cooling to prevent surface condensation. This chart generated by our Scorpion 2 data logger shows the surrounding air temperature as represented by the red line, as well as its corresponding dew point temperature as represented by the blue line. It is of paramount importance that the surrounding temperature has to stay above the dew point during the cooling process. This is to ensure that there is no condensation of water vapor on the surface of the kibble products. Because if there is any condensation of water on the surface of the product, it will induce growth of pathogens and mold upon packaging process, which is really bad for the shelf life of the product. Before we move on to the final part of this webinar, I would like to show you this video showing the production of big pad kibble. In this line that we have seen here, there is actually a fully automated line that uses a continuous mixer that can continuously churn out the kibble dough, and these dough are automatically transferred to the forming equipment, in this case, which is a Rotary molder. And here we see that the Rotary molded kibble dough are extracted onto the belt and later on transferred onto the oven belt for a baking process. Upon the baking process, this baked kibble with still about 15 to 20% of moisture content will be transferred to a 3-pass dryer to dry it down to about 8 to 10% of moisture content at the milder temperature. These are the final dry kibble. In the final part of this webinar, I will walk you through some of the examples of big pet food in the market. In this slide, we can find various types of big pet kibbles and pet treats made by different forming technologies. These are made by Rotary molded with a 3-dimensional shape. So all these are by Rotary molded technology. Then these are made by using a low pressure extrusion process. And we also have the soft treats, which are made by using the wire cut extrusion process. Some of these treats really resemble the human snacks, and many pet owners like the idea that they can finally feed their pet with something specially formulated that looks similar to human food. In some of the US pet food store, we can find baked pet treat on display where customers can mix and match their desired variety of dog biscuit for their beloved pet. So this is a closer look of what we can find in some of the US pet food store. Finally, I would like to wrap up this webinar with key takeaways for you. We have gone through the differences between baked kibble and high pressure extruded kibbles. And I have also shown that the pet food market has strong growth momentum going forward, and the trend of premiumization and humanization will drive the growth across all countries, especially for emerging markets. And big pet food will likely benefit from this trend, and it presents a good differentiation strategy for manufacturers. I also cover the key processing step of pet food baking, including the formulation, the mixing option, the forming options, the baking and drying, where we discuss about the Q step and water activity, as well as the product cooling process. We had also seen some of the examples of big pet food in the market. A successful commercial line for big pet food production has to be automated, flexible, and efficient in order to be competitive in today's landscape. I hope that you will find this webinar useful. In case you would like to explore pet food baking process in further details, please do not hesitate to contact me via email, WeChat, or WhatsApp. I look forward to speaking with you. Have a good day, everyone.